Chapter 3. Closing of the churches. I want to pause here and go back a few years when the communists began to close the churches in the late 1920s and early 1930s. I have already mentioned that religion was banned. There were exceptions to this rule, though. One could still find an Orthodox church to attend in places like Moscow, but these were communist-controlled. Visitors were also controlled and directed toward these sham churches, where they could hear a communist priest. If one was allowed to wander through the Soviet Union unattended, he would find no churches open. It might have been possible to find an underground group of Baptists, but they would be meeting against the law, and I never knew of any such groups. Grandfather Ignat Safronov. The normal method of closing a church began with the communists coming in and stripping the building of all its furnishings, paintings, ornaments, etc. Then they would make a warehouse out of the building. My grandfather, Ignat Safronov, was a miller by trade and owned 2 windmills where corn, wheat, and other grains were ground. But his first love was the Russian Orthodox Church. He had turned the running of the windmills over to his nephew and was full-time caretaker of the local Orthodox church building. I remember that he was so proud of it and kept it so clean. His heart was simply broken when they had to close it down. His windmills were also taken over by the government. He died shortly afterwards in 1932. I feel that these events shortened his life. If he could have lived until today, he would see those same churches reopening. Communists burned the records. One of the sad things about closing the churches, besides not being able to hold religious meetings anymore, was the fact that they indiscriminately burned the records. What a priceless genealogy history those records would have been today if they had not been destroyed. I started to school in 1931, and they were already teaching that there was no such thing as God, and that we should look up to men like Lenin and Stalin as our leaders. Parents were not to teach anything about religion that would refute the teaching of the school. If they did and were caught, they could end up in Siberia, never to be heard from again. The police would knock on your door at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and haul away the husband or father, and no one would ever really know what happened to him, and no one would ever hear from him again. Parents were afraid to say anything against the government, teach religion, or anything negative in front of their children, or in front of anyone else for fear of being turned in or reported to the police. No warrant was required and no proof was needed. The police would simply make an arrest, and he would vanish. Religious ideas do not die easily. As far as we were concerned, the churches were closed, and no one attended church. But religious ideas do not die quickly. Christmas was still being celebrated, but much in the same manner as the USA celebrates Halloween. The children would take a little bowl and go from house to house, where they would be given a spoonful of cooked rice or pudding of some sort. When their bowls were full, they would return home, where mother would top off their bowls with a little cooked fruit. This was always a delicious treat, because there was no such thing as candy in those days. At least not for us. I remember my last trip out with my bowl on Christmas Eve. I was about 10 years old, so this would have been about 1934. My sisters didn't want to go with me because we were being taught in school that this was silly, so I went alone. My bowl was filled as usual, and I sat down and let them watch me prepare to eat it all by myself. I was only kidding, of course, and eventually shared it with them. Celebration of Christmas not welcomed. The food was good, but what happened next morning when I went to school wasn't so good. I found that I had been observed by someone who thought I needed to be taught a lesson, So someone drew my picture with my little bowl in hand and portrayed me begging for food. This wasn't done just for my benefit. You can see how effective such tactics would be in curtailing any further Christmas observance by the other children, as well as myself. It was most embarrassing to see my picture hanging there on the school's bulletin board for all to see. I had learnt my lesson. I never went out again on Christmas Eve. I might remind you at this point that Christmas in Russia was on 7th January instead of 25th December. You might think that we were being taught about Christ because we were celebrating Christmas. But as I look back on it, we didn't know any more about why we were celebrating Christmas than little children of today know why they are celebrating Halloween. How many children or even adults know why we celebrate Halloween? Grandmother Agafia Safronov prayed. I suppose the thing about religion that stuck in my mind and must have had a lasting influence on me was seeing my grandmother Agafia Safronova on her knees by her bedside each morning upon arising. Her prayers were always silent, and we never knew what she was praying about. But I sensed the sacredness of it. My own mother always prayed in this manner too. I can remember Mother kneeling down to pray for a sick cow, and the cow was healed. Papa came in from the field one day and was very sick with a high fever. Mama asked the children to be quiet while she knelt and prayed for him. As soon as she arose to her feet, she said, "He will be all right." And within a few minutes, his temperature fell, and he returned to the field, feeling as good as ever. Those examples of prayer must have stuck with me as dormant seeds to sprout forth at a later time. Where else would I have gotten such a strong desire to know what religion was all about when I came to the United States as a young war bride after World War II? Just be patient, and I will tell you all about my courtship and marriage later on in the story.